You're tuned into the That Was Exciting podcast. Welcome to episode 2. I'm so excited to be kicking off the podcast with such a cool adventure. The next few episodes are going to be all about my adventure on the Great Allegheny Passage. Hopefully, all the information and details inspire you to get out on your bike. To get things started, I'm going to introduce you to Michael Bane, one of my adventure crew members and our go-to biking expert. Mike's excitement and knowledge about biking is the perfect foundation to build this series on. So let's get to know Mike a little bit better. Welcome to the show, Mike. Go ahead and get us started however you like.
I'm going to give you a little bit of the background of kind of what led me into cycling. And that is, I come from a running background. Obviously, I've told you that before. I had a sciatica entrapment. It became a persistent, long-standing problem. I basically fell out of all physical activity for 2 or 3 years. And then when I was about 198 or 200 pounds, I decided that was enough. I had 3 people tell me in one day that I gained some weight. And I said, well, this is crap. I'm gonna do something about this. So I tried to start jogging, and that was horrible. So I switched over to my bike and started cycling a bit. I kind of got into shape. A buddy of mine, James, really took the initiative to get me out there and keep me active, continued like leaving his normal rides to get out with me. And he encouraged me to go out and ride a ton. And that season, I pretty much went from doing nothing to, I want to say it was like a 3,500 or 4,000 mile year. And that 4,000 mile year led into a 12,000 mile year, followed by another 10 or 12,000 mile year. So weight-wise, I dropped from like 200 down to 148 or 150, and I was really, truly back in great shape. That's kind of the background of why I got back into cycling.
Wow, that's not only inspiring, but it's also super extreme. 12,000 miles a year? That sounds crazy.
12,000 miles, that's like a 200 plus mile a week average. And it is.
Now, are you doing that by just going out on scheduled rides, or are you going to work?
I was.
How does that accomplish?
Actually, for almost a year, I sold my vehicle. And not only did I ride like before work and after work, I also rode to work, from work. No vehicle, just if I was getting there, I was going to go ride my bike. I had 10 solid months of riding a bike.
That's awesome. A couple years ago when I got my bike, I was thinking the same thing about being more minimalistic and riding my bike everywhere. But after doing a 30 plus mile ride the first week I got it to a dentist appointment, that idea kind of just went out the window. Now, when I say I got a bike a couple years ago, I mean a good level bike, not the kind of bikes we used to have when we were kids. I'll go more into some details about how I kind of got started off biking as a kid and stuff like that, Mike. But do you remember your first bike?
Yeah, the first bike as a kid, it was actually an American-made Huffy from Kmart. It was a children's bike. I don't even know what the wheel size is on it, but it definitely wasn't a 16-inch, or it's probably a 12-inch, or I don't even know. For the audience out there, the coffee table that's sitting in front of us is probably 18 to 24 inches, and that was probably pretty close to the top tube of that bike. It was a little bike. Second bike was also a Huffy. Really a piece of crap. Not anywhere near the same quality as that. But my third bike was a TNT BMX race bike, and that was a heck of a bike. I want to say that the tire size was 20 by 1 3/8. So this thing was just a light and incredibly fast bike. Lots of fun. I had a paper route where I rode the bike every single day, winter, summer, I was always on the bike. I've enjoyed riding a bike from a young age. The first real road bike that I rode, my brother Steve had I want to say it was a Cannondale R600 that someone lent him for a summer. And I remember just getting on that thing. I could barely reach the pedals and taking it for a spin and blasting down Cumberland Road on it. It was so much fun. And then later on, early 20s, I actually did buy a Cannondale R600 with down tube shifters. And I rode that quite a bit until I bought a used Raleigh Grand Prix, which is a little bit of an upgraded bike, a little newer tech with paddle shifters. And then went from there to a carbon Motobicon, and from there right to the Jamis. But yeah, I mean, road biking's definitely been a big part of my life for a lot of years.
Yeah, I can tell. And I think most people would be able to tell how passionate you are about it after talking to you for a few minutes. As I get to know you, I keep on hearing more stories about more bikes and more bike trips. And every time I go down in your shop, I see more bike parts and there's bikes hanging everywhere. You have a huge collection.
So it's kind of funny that you say that I have a huge collection of bikes, because right now I have maybe 6 or 8 bikes. And about a year ago, I had 16 or 18 bikes. So my collection of bikes has come down more to the actual bikes that I need for given rides. And those bikes, real quickly, are a road bike. I have a Jamis Zenith Team Pro. I have a fixed gear State Black label that I ride on the road. And yes, it has a brake. I have a Cinelli Vigorelli track bike that I ride on the track. I have a Trek mountain bike. I have a Specialized Crux cyclocross bike. And I think that is all of the bikes. I really don't have a huge arsenal.
Well, that still sounds like quite the collection to me. It was really interesting. You said you cut your collection down to just specific bikes that you need for certain rides. So let's switch gears and talk about some of these rides. You've told me some stories about long rides, fast rides, rides on tracks, mountain bike rides, road bike rides. So let's touch base on a couple of the most memorable rides you have, or the current rides that you go out and do the most. There's that one you were telling me about that seems pretty intense, where you guys are like racing around the peninsula.
Sure. So Tuesday nights, there's a standing ride around Presque Isle. It's really a very high pace, high intensity pace line. There's typically between 10 and 30 riders. I like to think of it as a road race. So there are, all these riders and basically 6 or 8 miles of 27 to 30 mile an hour plus riding. That's probably the highest intensity riding that I do on a regular basis.
Well, that seems a little advanced for me, Mike. You were also telling me about a group that you were leading a ride around Erie, a cycling group that you were in charge of, and it seemed like it might be more for beginners, something I could keep up with, maybe something the listeners would be into. Maybe you could describe what that ride's like.
Low-key, lower traffic, yet very visible rides. Again, the goal of the ride is to raise awareness of cyclists. So we try to make ourselves visible, but we do kind of safe routes where we can ride very relaxed, through neighborhoods, off main roads, but we still end up on main roads. Erie only has one real bike path, and that's 6th Street. So the group will often travel on 6th Street in the bike path, just to show, that 20 to 40 person group presence out on the street. to raise awareness of cyclists.
Yeah, that sounds super cool. I'm definitely going to want to go try that out this year. I'll make sure in the show notes that we add some links and everything so people can find that group if they want to join in too. Now let's get back to some of the other amazing rides you've done. We just talked about what some of your most intense rides were. What was maybe your longest ride?
Longest ride in one day was a 200-mile ride from Erie to Buffalo and back. Just kind of rode to Buffalo to Pearl Street Brewing, had a beer and a sandwich, and rode back. The average on that ride was right around 20 miles an hour, so about 10 hours of riding. My longest ride ever was a 4.5-day ride, actually on the same route that you and I took. It was the Gap and C&O Trail combined from, I actually rode it from Erie, Pennsylvania, through Ohio, cut over from Youngstown to Sewickley, and then got up the next day and rode from Sewickley onto the Gap Trail, and then spent the next couple days getting to Washington, D.C. So longest ride, 500 miles from Erie to D.C. And other than that, I mean, really just a lot of very epic 70 to 100-mile rides around Erie County or Erie, Ohio, maybe a little bit into New York, just kind of like the tri-county here. Somewhat notable, a couple of years back, I had roughly a dozen rides to Southern Tier, which is a little bit over a 100-mile ride. My buddy James and I would just hop on the bikes. We rode them road bike, fixed gear, whatever we felt like for the day, and we hop on the bikes, 50 miles out, have a sandwich and a couple of beers, and 50 miles back.
You make a 100-mile ride sound so casual. Yep, just stop, have a sandwich, grab a couple beers, ride 50 miles back. Oh, man. Yeah, from my recent trip with you, 100 miles hasn't even been in a single day ride for me. That ride we did was the longest I ever did. And definitely the beer thing does help encourage you to do the second half of a ride. I'm still seriously thinking about contacting Twisted Tea to see if they'll sponsor me. I definitely couldn't have finished that ride that day without it, I don't think. But more of that story will be coming in the last episode. That was our final day on the trail. Speaking of the trail, the ride that we did was mostly asphalt and crushed limestone and fairly easy. We rode it on mountain bikes, but the first time you did that, Mike, weren't you on a road bike? And a lot of the rides you've been talking about are road bike rides. Do you prefer road biking over mountain biking?
I definitely prefer road riding over mountain biking, and that is just because I like speed. But favorite bike, probably the bike that I logged the most miles on, is the State Black Label fixed gear. What I like about the State Black Label fixed gear is really that riding a fixed gear is kind of like learning how to ride a wave. I think fixed gear riding really helps you form, it really helps your form or your riding form. You get a feel for the bike. You feel like you're connected to the road. It's just really truly a joy to ride the fixed gear. The simplicity of the bike, no gears to shift, one chain, no freewheel. You just, when the bike is in motion, you're pedaling. If you pedal forward, you go forward. If you pedal backward, you go backward. Front brake on the bike just for safety out on the road. But the simplicity of it is just a wonderful thing.
Now, I might be the only one listening to you that has no idea what a fixie is. Could you explain that a little bit for me?
So a fixie or a fixed gear is a bike with one gear, and it is truly a gear. It's literally a cog screwed onto the rear hub and locked with a lock ring. So instead of what you rode as a child, likely a BMX bike, where you had a freewheel on the back, that freewheel would allow you to coast, pedal backward. A fixed gear, when the bike is in motion, the drivetrain is in motion. because again, the rear cog is screwed onto the rear hub, if that makes sense. It's a lot like an exercise bike. You spin them up and you kind of have to keep pedaling until the crank or the pedals that you're pushing come to rest. Which, again, like I said, you truly learn to feel the power stroke of the crank, or in other words, how to pedal a circle instead of squares. It's kind of a hard thing to describe until you've done it, but almost everyone that I've referred to a fixie or a fixed gear says, wow, I see exactly what you mean. Once you've done it, it just kind of clicks, and it's so much more fun than, single speeds are fun. All fixed gears are a single speed, but a single speed is not a fixed gear.
Now, that is why you're my go-to bike guy, Mike. What an explanation. It makes a lot more sense now that you explain it that way. I guess the closest thing to a fixed gear that I would have ever rode is probably a workout bike at the YMCA. Sometimes with the weather around here, we have to ride inside. And you were telling me about riding inside a little bit, and you actually showed me some weird contraption just a few minutes ago down in your workshop. You said it was some sort of rollers, and I'll put a picture up or a video so anybody that's going to be listening to this on YouTube can kind of get an idea what I'm talking about. But it looks crazy, and I don't think I've ever seen anything like this at any workout facility.
Yeah, so you're used to seeing a spin bike or a trainer. A trainer maybe would be something you would take the rear wheel off your bike or replace the quick release skewer with something that would lock up, and you would ride your bicycle indoors on this stationary fixed device. That's what a trainer is. Now rollers, you just kind of sit a bicycle on the rollers. What's unique is that the bike isn't clamped down or stationary in any way. You actually have to balance on the bike, and you ride just like you are on the road. But these rollers, somewhat self-explanatory here, they roll on a track, and it's very challenging. Fun but challenging. It definitely requires a lot of concentration when you're first getting on and off of the rollers and getting them spun up to speed. Once you're spun up to speed, riding on the rollers is not horridly difficult, but still challenging.
Well, I think I'd like you to help me maybe try it once or twice just so I can say I've done it. But I think the stationary bike is where I'm going to stick to when I have to ride inside. Now, it's pretty obvious that you do more than just riding these bikes inside. With all the tools in your basement and everything that's all around, there's a whole lot more work going on than just riding bikes here.
Well, I'm actually just in the process of building a shop. Hung a pegboard up to hang all the bike-specific tools, cone wrenches and headset and bottom bracket presses and wheel bearing presses, crown race removal tools, and we can go on forever about the tools. I definitely have more bike-specific tools than standard tools.
I know you've built several bikes from scratch, Mike, and it's obvious with all the tools that you just talked about that you're all set up to do that. But for somebody that's never built a bike, you just don't go run to the local hardware store and pick up bike parts. Could you walk us through exactly what happens when you're putting together and building a bike?
Yeah, you basically pick your frame. You buy a frame set, and you buy that, and then you buy all of the parts: wheels, tires, chain crank, handlebars, brakes. Everything comes separate from the frame, and then you just build the bike exactly how you want it right from the start.
Well, if I ever decide to upgrade and go the route of a custom designed and built bike, I definitely am just going to come to you because I've never seen the parts you're talking about laying around on the shelves at Lowe's or Home Depot. And those are the only places I shop for parts. In all seriousness, though, it really takes a lot of talent to be able to piece together one of these bikes you're talking about. These are sophisticated machines. Now, if somebody doesn't want to go the route to actually come to somebody like you to get one of these bikes built, then the option is going and getting a more custom bike from a shop. Where do you recommend somebody starts when they're brand new to getting back into biking?
I can summarize this right now perfectly, and that is I mean, if you have $100 to spend on the bike, look on Craigslist and find something older that's still high quality. I mean, if you find a Specialized or a Trek and you're looking for a hardtail mountain bike, you're going to find something decent that's 125 or $150. I guarantee it. But I mean, if you're going to go buy a new bike and you got $100, I would steer you toward a used bike. If you're going to consider going to like a Target where they have Schwinn, which is a decent bike, and you're willing to spend $300 or $400, I highly encourage you to go to a bike shop and buy an entry-level bike that's going to be a couple $100 more, because frankly, it's going to be 10 times the bike for a couple $100 more. And while you're there, you might see that, for double what you thought you wanted to spend, you're going to have a forever bike that is going to do everything that you ever dreamed of. If you can swing getting the bike that you want up front, you're going to save yourself a whole lot of trouble down the road, because you're not going to outgrow it. You're not going to think, boy, I wish I would have bought that one. You're not going to have to get rid of your entry-level bike to go buy a mid-level or a high-level bike. And honestly, I mean, you can get very high-level bikes that are alloy frame for, under 2K that are spectacular. I mean, basically pro level, just non-carbon frame. So, I mean, that's always an option. And honestly, my next bike's going to be aluminum. I know that. I don't need a carbon bike.
Yeah, that is some great advice. A couple years ago, I decided to upgrade and get a bike for the first time in like 20 years and start riding again. And I got an all-purpose mountain bike, and I even stepped it up a couple levels more than I thought that I was going to when I originally was planning a budget for around $1,000. I think I found a really nice bike on sale. I think it was around $1,200, but I am just so impressed every time I go out and ride, and so happy I did the upgrades. And it's just amazing the technology that's in these bikes now. So if you're brand new to biking, or if you're looking to get back into biking, get out there, check out some of the local bike shops. There's a couple good ones around Erie. There's also some in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Buffalo worth looking at. I've got a relationship with Competitive Gear here in Erie, and that's where I got my bike, and recommended a couple friends go, and they've got some similar gear. They carry the Trek brand. I also have looked at quite a few bikes in Pittsburgh at the REI down there, and the REI in Pittsburgh has a large selection because it's right off the Gap Trail, and that's actually where we stopped, and we'll be talking a little bit more about in one of the upcoming videos. So just get out there, check out your local bike shops. There's some other opportunities too. Mike was telling me about some different bike shows and conferences and all kinds of expos that are going on. And you actually had a really interesting story about the one you were just at this fall.
This past year at Lake Erie Cycle Fest, my wife and I met a couple from London, Ontario area, and they encouraged us to come up to Canada and ride on an indoor track. So I decided to take them up on it. A couple months ago, my wife and I went to London to the Forest City Velodrome. Don't quote me here, but it's 300 and something meters, 384, 364. But it's actually a short track, about half the distance of an Olympic track. And what that means is the banks on the walls are pretty steep. This velodrome has 51-degree banks and 17-degree flats. So you've got to be going about 22K on the lower lane, and I want to say about 26K on the upper lane to not slide off the track. And it was just a super fun experience. I went up, I took a course, track 1. I still need to finish track 2, but I'm really looking forward to it. We actually have that scheduled here for February, so looking forward to that. Track riding is just a ton of fun. And in another episode, we can talk about the logistics of how you get on and off and how the track works. But I would recommend it to anyone. It was just truly a joy to do.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to an in-depth episode about something like that. It sounds really super interesting. I don't know if you'd ever get me up on that track. It looks like a straight up and down wall from the picture you showed me. I'll try to post that picture here so people can get an idea how steep that is. It's unbelievable that you're actually riding your bike on there. It kind of reminds me of those metal balls they ride the motorcycles around in at a festival, and they go upside down and they're acting all crazy. Just don't stop pedaling, I guess, right? I know you gave me an open invitation to join you doing that sometime, but I just don't see my skill level getting to that point in the near future. Now, there's some other interesting rides that you've been thinking about doing. What would be like the ultimate ride if you could do anything?
Oh, if I could do any bike ride, no time limitations and or restraints, I would just ride through the entire U.S., all 50 states, tent camp, credit card camp, combination thereof, and weather dependent, ultralight packing, just bare minimum of what I need, and zero plans other than the state I'm starting in, and just get on a bike and ride. I mean, that to me would be awesome. Absolutely awesome. It would be the most epic journey. Just get on a bike, no care of how long it's going to take or expectation of what's going to happen. Just start in Maine and work your way across the northern rim and, east to west, and just switch back through all the states or ride around the U.S. and just kind of work your way into the middle. I don't know. I mean, whatever speaks or manifests itself. But yeah, I think that would be an epic journey.
Yeah, that kind of freedom just sounds amazing. I definitely want to be part of that, probably as like a support vehicle, maybe meet you in a couple states, ride for a little bit, but maybe we'll find some listeners that even get excited about biking on that same kind of level and want to join us. And you can do a US tour and we can just join you on different parts of the ride. That would be pretty cool. I think to wrap up today's interview, why don't we lead into the Gap Trail? Obviously, that's what this whole series is about. Why don't you do a real quick highlight about the last time you were on the Gap Trail to get everybody thinking about the direction we're headed here, and we'll wrap this show up and move on to the next one.
A lot of that first trip was really a pretty quick ride. Again, 4.5 days, 500 miles. So we were averaging a little bit over 100 miles a day. There were certainly stops and scenery, the bridges, the Big Savage, the other tunnels on the trail, the mountain line we saw just outside of Cumberland, Maryland. There were definitely some points, but boy, after you and I rode the trail, there were a whole bunch of areas that just I didn't remember at all because we were just kind of blasting through the trail or talking, and they were just completely lost.
Well, the good news is we did take it a little bit slower, and there's going to be tons of details about the trip we actually did. Even though it was only 3 days, we took a lot of notes, and there's going to be a lot of interesting things coming up in the next few episodes. I am so glad that we got to spend some time with you, Mike, getting to know you better. I learned a lot. I'm hoping everybody that's been listening has learned a lot more, because your expertise and experience is what led us to this ride and got me out on my bike. My biking experience is totally different. I'm going to explain that to you guys right now. I do have it posted on my website under my biking section. I'm just going to read the overview of my past biking history real quick so you guys get an idea where I'm coming from now that you know I'm riding with an experienced rider. I don't think I've ridden 150 miles in the past year, let alone in one weekend. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. So obviously this trip can be done by anybody from an advanced rider like Mike to a kind of rookie beginner, not your everyday rider like me. I still survived it and had a great time. So I'll go into a little bit about my biking history real quick. Like most kids that grow up out in the country, my mountain bike was my main form of transportation. I still remember my first big kid biking adventure. This memory started out with me signing up for a bike-a-thon, Ride for Charity in Northeast, my local community. I'm guessing I was around 12 years old, and I was ready to upgrade to a big boy bike for this event. With all my saved up money in hand, I headed out to the local store, and again, I think it was a Kmart, and it was a Huffy was the first bike that I got into. It was a 24-inch 10-speed, I think, kind of like a gray white in color. I still remember not being able to touch the ground, which would end up being very painful in the near future. I have always questioned why boys' bikes had a straight bar for us to land on when we fell off the seat. Certain streets around town were set up as the course, forming a big loop that we rode around and around and around. It was important to follow the course because this is how we would track our mileage. For a few weeks leading up to the event, everyone would go out and find sponsors. The sponsors would pay a few cents for every mile that, was ridden, with this donation going towards the charity. To make a long story short, 63 miles later, alongside the last remaining big kids, better known at the time as the high schoolers, I finished up my first epic ride. Hopefully you have some great stories and memories that are similar from when you were biking as a kid. I can still remember the look on my grandmother's face when I went to collect my 63 miles worth of donations. That was truly priceless. Now, let's fast forward 20 years. For some reason, I end up listening to some stuff about simplifying life and how to become more minimalistic. This leads to hiking, backpacking, camping, hitchhiking, and you guessed it, biking. Now, with the ideas of a through hike through the Appalachian Mountains or biking across uncharted wilderness running through my head, the next logical step, of course, would be getting a new mountain bike. After doing a few weeks of research and really narrowing down my selection, it was time to pull the trigger. Now, if you are like me and the last biking experience you can think about was a few decades ago, let me tell you, things have really changed since then. Biking technology is now totally awesome. Everything from hydraulic disc brakes to air suspension systems that actually work are now available. I'll go into further details about the bike model that I ended up getting and the gear selection, as well as a separate post detailing all the different information about this bike. So once again, with a shiny new bike, I decided to take it out for a spin. Now that I was an instant minimalist and biker, I decided to ride to my dentist appointment the next day. My grand new ideas quickly became reality, and 38 miles later, I found myself finally returning home with my legs in more pain than my mouth. Since that maiden voyage, I have done several trips, and they've all ended up with spectacular stories similar to this. It is a great feeling to get out and push yourself in ways you haven't for years. I think mixing things from your past that you're familiar with is a good way to feel more comfortable when trying new adventures. If you are serious about getting back into biking, one of my first recommendations is to find a buddy. Having someone else to go out riding with is a ton of fun. There are also many other advantages that I'm sure we'll touch on in future posts, from safety to storytelling. After showing my friend Adam how awesome the new biking technology was with these new age bikes, of course he decided to start riding again too. We have logged a few hundred miles, and every mile makes for another great story. Check out the links in the pages on the website and some of the blog posts I have, a few YouTube videos to see some of our first rides. So to wrap this up, my biking adventures and stories are more geared towards beginners and regular weekend warriors. Most of the biking adventures that you will be seeing can be done in an afternoon, a single day, for the most part, maybe a weekend. I'm going to highlight a lot of details like how to get there, how our ride went, what to bring, where to grab lunch, and many other tips so that you can get out there and do it too. If you're located somewhere else in the country, and the locations that I mentioned are a little bit too far away, I guarantee there'll still be a lot of great tips and exciting stories for you to listen to and read about. I also encourage all of you to share your tips on biking and adventures with the rest of us. I'm always looking for new and exciting places to ride, and who knows, maybe by sharing a story, you encourage somebody else to get out there on their bike, and that's the purpose of all of this. So with that being said, the next few episodes are going to be me and Mike telling you all the details about our journey on the Gap Trail so you can get out and enjoy the same ride or come and join us next time. I hope you really enjoyed this first episode in the series, and I'm really excited to start episode 2. We're going to be going over the details of traveling down to Pittsburgh, the history of Point Park, a little bit more information about what the Gap Trail is, and what our first day was like on the trail. So tune in next time as we continue exploring the Great Allegheny Passage. Thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to you being here next time. Until then, remember, make every day an adventure.